Y'all, it's Alicia. Thank you so much for joining me again on the Eating Me podcast. I am excited because I have Kimberly Parker here on the podcast. And it's amazing because, before I hit record, we were just talking about different things and just trying to get our groove and, do what we do in this whole podcasting world. And
Mhm,
she is a therapist,
mhm,
licensed therapist, and we were just talking about just this whole idea around um, MPs, nurse practitioners. For people who are like, "What's an MP?"
mhm,
Nurse
mhm,
practitioners, and the idea of them actually, increasing just like their credentials in terms of like, providing other services. And so I
mhm.
just, I told her a really funny story, and all that to say, here we are, just ready to just go. I am so excited you were here.
Yes.
And, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Thank you for also, you
Yeah.
know, stepping in to talk about this whole idea around liberation and what that looks like for the Black community on a mental health, on the mental health side, because
Absolutely.
there's so many things we can unpack with this actual conversation. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely, Alicia. I'm so excited to be here with you. And when I saw that you were looking for guests for your podcast, I thought like I always kind of go with the feeling, like I read the description, but I also go with the feeling. And I just really felt excited about this topic because there's so many ways one can liberate themselves through finding healing and wholeness and wellness for themselves. And
Mhm.
so I just appreciate you for providing this platform and for bringing up this very, very meaningful topic.
Oh, you are welcome. And
Mhm.
it's wild because when I was looking at your website, and
Yeah.
I love the fact that um it said your app is now the company's called Revive to Thrive.
Yes, Revive to Thrive Wellness Center. Mhm,
Listen, when
mhm,
I saw that,
mhm.
because that's another
Yeah,
word that I have been really trying to like
yes, yes.
embody,
Mhm.
because we're always so used
Absolutely.
to surviving.
Absolutely, and that's, like, exactly what I was thinking of when the name of the practice came to me is I think, like, a lot of times we find ourselves in this stuck place or almost this, like, place where we don't feel alive, and sometimes we just need a little bit of CPR. We need a little bit of revival to
Hmm.
come back, and then I agree, I think, like, yes, we spend a lot of time in survival mode, so why not thrive? Why
Right.
not be able to make that pivot from surviving to thriving. So absolutely. Mhm.
Oh, I love that. And I also wanted to ask before we just,
Yeah,
plowing through, because that's me. I'll plow through. That's just
yeah,
how I roll.
absolutely. I'm here for it.
No, but before we get going with that, what got you into the mental health world? Like, was
Yeah.
there anything in particular, or you just kind of like that was just something that was in you? Like, I'm gonna be a therapist. Like, how did you get into this whole world?
Absolutely. That's such a great question, Alicia. So I always knew that I wanted to help people. That was just
Mhm.
something always on my heart. When I was a kid, my mom, I'm originally from California. And so when I was a child, my mom and my grandma used to take me and my sisters to go feed the homeless. And I really enjoyed that because it was just nice, like seeing people live differently. And not that we had like a whole bunch, right? But like it was just really, I felt good about what I was doing. I felt good
Right.
about helping people. And so as I got older, I realized, oh, I want to help people. But then I also realized I want to make money. And so I was like, well, I'll be a doctor. And then I took my first anatomy class and I was like, no, thanks. That's not what I want to do. And so then I thought, okay, I'll be a dentist. And like that wasn't too much different, in taking the next science and math class. So I was like, okay, I don't want to do that. And so I ended up, probably my last semester or so of my undergraduate degree. I decided, oh, I want to go to grad school because all my friends are going to grad school and it looks like they want to be psychologists. So, maybe I'll try that too. So I went into a graduate program for psychology and with the intentions of becoming a clinical psychologist because they had an accelerated program that I could do. And then I found out that that program was not APA accredited,
Mm.
which is like, I really need that accreditation just for, making sure that the program has good standards and things of that nature. And so I found myself working at a university, having a master's degree in psychology, and just feeling very unfulfilled in my life because I knew that there was more. And I ended up meeting with the head of the psychology department at the college I was working at. And after we talked a little bit about the differences between psychology and counseling, he's like, I really think you should get a master's degree in counseling. And I was like, who gets 2 masters? I was like, that sounds like ludicrous. Like, I for sure was thinking like PhD or PsyD was like my next move. And sure enough, I took his advice. That was Dr. Fred Rabinowitz. I took his advice. I applied to 2 counseling programs in Texas. UNT is a school that I ended up going with, and then they ended up employing me there as well. And the rest is just kind of history. I've just
Wow.
been here in Texas. I guess that was in 2015 that I literally came here like on a wing and a prayer, and the rest is history.
That is so amazing. And I love the fact that you just kind of like took that leap and was like, you know what, I'm just gonna see how this all,
Yes.
transpires. That is really cool.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. It was very scary. I never thought I'd leave California. I mean, I'm the youngest of 3 and, very much so enjoyed my mountains and my beaches and my Mexican food. And so, moving was huge. I left all my friends, and thankfully my sister moved here the same year that I moved here as well. We both started going to school together, and so I wasn't all by myself, but all alone, but thankfully it all worked out.
Yeah. That is
Mhm.
so awesome.
Thank
It's and
you.
I'm kind of shifting, but not because it's still on that
Yeah.
whole idea of mental health. But like
Yeah.
in the in your actual like family structure,
Mhm. Mhm.
was the idea of seeking mental health care
Yeah.
taboo, or is that just always been like a common practice in your family?
No, it's definitely taboo, and I make the joke, but it's very serious actually, that, like, my dad is still under the impression that I work with crazy people. And so, like,
Yeah.
being a Black man and, like, this whole idea of counseling is, like, still very strange to him.
Mm,
Um, I do remember as a child going to, like, family counseling maybe, like, once or twice,
mhm,
but it wasn't anything that we did. It wasn't like going to the dentist or going to the doctor. It wasn't anything that was normalized when I was growing up. And now, it's so funny. And I think I'm pretty sure she'll be okay with me saying this. But just last night, my mom told me, she's like, I think I'm ready to start seeing a counselor. And, you know,
nice.
so besides my dad, I've pretty much recruited my whole immediate family to counseling, even my nieces and nephew. And so that's years later, though, right? This has all been kind of like history in the making, I guess you could say.
Right. And
Mhm.
and the thing is, I thank you for that because I'm
Absolutely.
wondering how many people
Mhm,
still are
mhm.
experiencing that in their actual
Yeah,
family structure. That idea around like we don't talk about it
absolutely.
or it's not even a thing. And if I am in therapy,
Mhm.
I'm afraid I'm going to be either ostracized or people are going to look at me different in my family. Um,
Absolutely.
and if that is the case, how do you hear
Mhm.
that with people that you work with that they can't share that they're seeking
Mhm.
counseling with their family because of fear of either being ostracized or looked at differently in any way?
Absolutely. So that's my ideal client, honestly, is I
Wow.
enjoy working with BIPOC individuals, so Black
Mhm.
individuals, POCs. That is who I really love working with, because a lot of the times I think as therapists, our passions come from lived experiences. And so I enjoy working with people where they're on this journey of, dare I say, liberation and finding
Mhm.
themselves and wanting to live as their best and highest selves, but they still are connected to family members who are not on that same healing journey.
Mm.
And a lot of my clients, they still love their family and they still want them in their lives. And so we kind of talk about how to merge those two worlds. Like, how can you set boundaries and do all the things that individuals with healthy habits do when you are still coexisting with individuals, loved ones who haven't gone on that journey just yet.
Wow. And it's so funny that you say it that way because at this time, my siblings and I, and two of my nieces, who we basically all grew up as siblings. Long
Yeah.
story, my oldest sibling
Yeah.
was pregnant when my mom was pregnant with me. And
Yes.
so my niece and I grew up as
Yes, absolutely.
right. So we all grew up kind of like siblings. And so all that to say, we're now going through, I
Yeah.
don't know if you know Nidra Glover to walk.
Yes. Yes.
So as a family, we are reading, we've started like a book, kind of like a book
Oh my
club,
gosh.
and we are reading drama free right now.
Oh my gosh. You funny thing, I've got to show you because I've got like a stack of books. That's I got it
Stop
right
it.
here. I got it. Ninja, I love her. And we have so I have a group. It turned out to be a BIPOC group, but we are going through this book. We're actually having our graduation ceremony next week.
No way.
Yes. So I love that you and your family are doing that. That's like a dream for me. That's so ideal. I love that.
Yeah. And the reason why I brought that up at that time was because I think the reason why we had to actually do that was
Yes.
we were either going to completely split apart
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
or we had to, figure out something. And so luckily
Absolutely.
one of my
Absolutely.
nieces shared
Mhm.
this book with me and was
Yes.
and this was even before we were thinking about bringing family together and doing
Yeah.
this. But it just hit me. I was like, we need to start figuring out how we're gonna continue to
Yes.
or we'll just have to kind of like exist, like you were saying,
Yeah.
finding ways to exist with family members that just aren't on that level
Exactly.
of, you know,
Exactly.
understanding like how to like liberate themselves in ways of
Yeah.
understanding something in terms of like mental health, like care and stuff like that. And
Yes.
so, luckily, this is helping us to kind of like bridge that gap.
Yeah.
But I know
Yes.
that's not ideal for everyone. So for those that are in those spaces in
Yeah.
particular, I mean, we didn't go like into like crazy
Yeah. Yeah.
explanation, but like for family or for friends, not friends, take two, Alicia. For
Yes.
clients of yours, I'm just so excited that you had this book. I'm like, oh my god.
Yes. I love it too.
But for clients of yours that are on that journey that don't have that support with family, is like are there certain things that you try to guide them through to like make peace with knowing that their family's not going to be on that actual path of them, like how does that work?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a lot of work around acceptance.
Mm,
It really is because I find that a lot of the turmoil comes into play when you don't accept the family member for who they are and or where they're at, I should say. And oftentimes the word that comes up, I notice in these situations is sacrifice
mm,
because of that desire to still be around family even if they're not always behaving in a way that is in alignment with yourself. And so it's almost like, it might be that the client had a family vacation that was supposed to be a week. And because they love their family, they end up going for 2 days instead of the full week. And there's still some sacrifice in that, right? Because their vacation's getting cut short. And they're also putting themselves in sometimes a little bit of a high turmoil situation
mhm.
and so there's some sacrifice that comes up based upon that desire to have their family and this new identity, this new person that they're evolving to. So we talk about things like coping ahead a lot. Like I had, absolutely. I had a client recently who, without going into too much detail, knew that they had something similar coming up, a family vacation. So we talked around like ways to cope. We even did some role playing of like, okay, if a family member says this because they are used to saying these disrespectful or hurtful comments towards you, how are you going to respond as your highest self?
Mm,
And then giving my client permission to know we're not always going to get it right because we are human and because we make errors along the way. I make probably however many a day, right?
right.
Is we talk about how to show self compassion as you're on this journey because sometimes we have a little inside joke within the group and it's called responding in like Eric Mays because he said when they go low I go lower, and so we have a little bit of grace with each other and we say okay, sometimes Eric Mays is going to come out
Right.
and sometimes we're gonna do it in a different way and be like our former first lady and go high, and
Right.
that's the goal. Mhm.
Right. Okay. No, I
Yes.
love that because I just like hearing that. It's like that's been me several times.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yes.
No, oh gosh, I love that. But like just
Yeah.
also like thinking about this whole idea around liberation. Like there's so many things, like I
Yes.
said before we hit record, y'all. I was saying
Mhm.
to Kimberly, there's so many things we can unpack
Yeah.
about the idea of liberation as it relates to mental health.
Mhm.
But in terms of like what you see and
Yeah.
experience with especially black and brown people
Yes.
seeking that type of liberation in
Mhm.
your practice,
Mhm.
what are like some common like trends or like patterns you see with people who are really just trying to
Yeah.
step forward and step out of like, cycles of like maybe generational trauma or whatever? Like, what does that look like? Because I'm just definitely
Absolutely.
interested.
No, for sure, Alicia. So, like, there's a couple of things that come to my mind when I think about what that journey looks like.
Mm,
And I think that something we don't talk about enough when we talk about this liberation journey, especially as it relates to mental health, but I'm sure it can be applied to so many other areas of liberation, is the isolation
mm,
that one goes through. It can be very, very isolating to be that cycle breaker in the family.
mm,
And to be that person who wants to do different things differently, who wants to have a different type of conversation, who wants to stop sweeping things under the rug, who wants to stop living in a way that is not genuine to them.
mm,
And so there can be a lot of isolation that comes along with that because again, you almost serve as a mirror to the others who are, in your family or your circle. You're almost a mirror, and you're kind of showing them something that they might not want to come to terms with just yet. And so there's isolation in that because sometimes you don't always want to be the punching bag. Sometimes you don't want to always educate the family on this and that. And then sometimes, you can be isolated from your family for doing different and thinking differently. And so that's a really huge thing. Again, I don't think we talk about it enough, is the isolation that comes up and the loneliness at
mm,
times that can come up, which for folks who engage in more of a collectivistic mindset, like that is like exactly what we don't want. We don't want that isolation or that loneliness. And so I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle in what I see in my clients. I also see a lot of extremes as they are learning. So, like, they no longer want to operate like this. So then I notice they go to the complete opposite extreme, and then we kind of wiggle our way to where they want to go, through time and through practice. And so it might be someone who has found themselves being very aggressive in their communication with their loved ones. And so then they go to the other extreme of being more passive until we can get them to be more assertive, which I always say is like right in the middle. And so there's isolation, there's extremes, but then there's a lot of empowerment as well. There's a lot of empowerment that can come up because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something different. Like, oh, I don't want to communicate like that. Oh, I don't want to have poor spending habits like that. Oh, I don't want to, engage in relationships this way. And they start to see the fruits of their labor
mm,
and all of this hard work they're doing. And oftentimes the conversation with them as I am congratulating them looks very much so like this, like, I'm so happy that I'm at this place, Kimberly, but it's hard. And they make the joke and they tell me, Kimberly, I don't want to be God's toughest soldier anymore. I want to be, so we laugh and we chuckle about it, but that's how it is. It's almost it can be bittersweet or mixed emotions
mm.
is what I see and what I experience with my clients. And I would say the rewards absolutely outweigh any of the difficulty that they have to experience on this liberation journey.
I love that, and I love the fact that you brought up well, few things. I love the fact that you brought up the whole isolation piece because I think people think when they think of the word liberation, or maybe it's
Yeah.
just me, when I initially kind of like started thinking about this whole idea around liberation was like, oh my gosh, we're breaking free. And
Yeah.
joy and happiness and all this is like, but at the same time, like we can acknowledge that part.
Mhm.
And there is going to be some isolation. There can be some sadness. There can be some depression or,
Yes.
just kind of like angst around the idea of like, oh, I'm going against the grain of what
Yeah.
I'm used to and what my family
Absolutely.
structure is used to, or my
Absolutely.
community, my Black community is used to,
Yes.
you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's wild to be in that type of position, to just kind of like go against the grain. But it's like, how can we as a Black community, or maybe there's several things we
Mhm.
can do as Black people to,
Mhm.
one, step into understanding that mental health is just as important as physical health and is liberating in some way. So like, how
Yes.
can we
Yes.
continue to that momentum of
Yeah.
sharing that mental health is not this, like you said, your dad thinks, oh, she's just seeing crazy people, as opposed
Mhm.
to like a preventative health measure that will then liberate you, with so many other things that you might be in some type of crazy pattern, not realizing that you could break free from those things.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's about having more conversations and being really courageous because it is so hard to kind of share these ideas with folks and to talk about these things, especially for those who are so embedded in like the earlier lessons and rules that were made up when they were growing up.
Hmm.
And so like my dad's is in his 60s. So like, if we take it all the way back, like he's learned this idea way, way back when, and so but that's not always the case because my grandmother, who is a very mature late 80s woman, she's totally open to counseling, and absolutely she's totally open to it. And so I say different strokes for different folks, but I think it's all about having courageous conversations. But I also think it's about, and this is maybe like a little bit of my higher ed hat coming on a little bit, is we need more people who look like us
Mm,
do this work because there's a very popular male therapist that I follow, Dr. Jay Barnett. And so like just seeing a black man, like I think more black men and even black women and black children need to see like, hey, men get help too.
yeah.
Men talk about these things too. And I know there's several other male therapist leaders that are out there that I follow on social media as well that are helping with this movement to express yourself and to know that like you can still be strong, you can still be all these things and get help. And so I think it's about having more therapists who look like us, which that then becomes somewhat of a systemic issue because we've got to have folks to train and bring these people up.
Yeah.
Well, a huge part of my journey right now as a doc student in a counseling program is that I'm learning that a lot of the weight for these conversations falls on the black woman or the BIPOC faculty,
Right.
and there's only so many of us. And so like we even need more educators who look like us, which is a lot of the conversation that I'm having with folks too is like, wow, I never heard anybody say that in class, and wow, I've never heard anybody talk about decolonizing therapy, and all of these things. And so yeah, I think it's systemic. Like we need more counselor educators, and that can be from marriage, family therapists, licensed social work, whatever the discipline is. We need more people who look like us and more people who are willing to teach like us because without that, sometimes we become white counselors, which is a realization that I came to about myself recently was that I am a colonized therapist because everything about my profession is white. And so I've had to learn essentially how to put lipstick on a pig, and teach myself how to not be a white therapist anymore.
Fire, like straight fire. And the reason why I say that is because I am thinking about how just even me being taught
Yeah.
in the nursing world and
Yes.
all
Yep.
of the information that was shared, and you're kind of like side eyeing like, what? And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, but this is the standard, right? Like,
Yep.
I guess this is what we have to follow. But it's like, so in terms of like this whole idea of like either deconstructing or decolonizing the
Yes.
world of
Mhm.
mental health and psychology and all of that.
Yes.
Is that something that's happening? And if it is, like, what are the steps
Yeah.
that that world is taking in order to put the BIPOC person at the
Yeah.
forefront and really recognizing that there a lot of their thoughts and feelings and like experiences are so much different than the average white person?
Absolutely, for sure, for sure. And I want to be totally honest with you. I am like very novice in this
Right.
decolonizing therapy journey because it wasn't until being in my doc program that I realized that the counseling theories were written by white people for white people. The supervision models were written by white people for white people. And then in addition to that, when we think about things like research and who's approving what articles and this and that, like just the whole world of it. And
Mhm.
so through this kind of transformative period that I've been going through, I've been looking towards scholars and individuals like Dr. Jennifer Mullen. She recently came out with a book called Decolonizing Therapy. And
Hmm.
so I think part of that liberation journey and helping to become a decolonized therapist is starting off with doing your own research,
Mm.
is a huge piece of the puzzle. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is like doing the research and finding ways to not only not counsel people in a colonized way, but I have to be mindful of the students that I supervise and the students that
Right.
I teach, because I've been guilty of this colonization in all roles, because it's what I was taught, and it
Right.
was what I was taught. So I'm actually going through a re-education process. So I think that's what it looks like, is
Mm.
unlearning what we've learned and like throwing that in the trash can
Right.
essentially,
Right.
and learning these new ways of practices. And it's not, again, it goes down to the way that we're counseling, the way that we're teaching, the way that we're supervising, the way that we're doing research. And in addition to that, I also think about the thought left me. If it comes back, I'll come back to it. But
I love it.
it's a complete overhaul. Oh, assessments is another thing I was going to bring up, because we know those are normed on people that don't look like us either. And so
Right.
it's really about being on the inside, tearing things up from the inside, and rebuilding it is what that process looks like. And I don't know if that totally
Yeah.
answered the question exactly, but
Hmm. No, it does. And as you
yeah.
were saying that, I was thinking about, like, I'm not working in the clinics anymore.
Mhm.
But when I was working in clinic in like clinical setting, and I remember we would do different assessments, and it
Yeah.
was the PHQ,
Yep.
is it two? I
PhD
think
dive. Uh-huh.
nine, PHQ
Yep.
nine.
Yep.
And I remember because I worked in a clinic where
Mhm.
it was basically like BIPOC, you
Yes.
know,
Yes.
actual community. And some of the questions that I was asking, like I would have to reword them because some of the kids were like,
Exactly.
"What? Like I don't know this
Exactly.
language," you know. So it's just like it was
Exactly.
so interesting working in that setting because it was like,
Mhm.
okay, I can see and I can
Yeah.
feel that something's going on with you, but
Mhm.
because unfortunately the way this is written, I
Yes.
can't get the actual I can't get anything that's really I guess I could say factual in terms of how you're
Mm.
actually presenting here in my office. It looks like
Yes.
you need to see a counselor, but because of the way the actual form was set up, the kids were like,
Yes.
I'm cool, like I'm good, like
Yes, exactly. And you bring up, I'm so glad you brought that piece up, Alicia,
uh-huh.
because when we have issues that we know has happened throughout time for our people, is underdiagnosing and overdiagnosing. And
Mm,
then the harm behind that, because if you're telling someone, let's say they're hearing from their ancestors, and you're telling them now they're experiencing psychosis, so you want to pump them up with various medications, there's so much danger. There's so
mm,
much harm that have been done to BIPOC folks, to the Black community, due to them being judged. I'm talking more so about clinical judgment and maybe judgment outside of that as well, that
right.
does not serve them well.
Wow. And
Mhm.
that's wild. As you're talking about that, I mean, I've lived so many lives, Kimberly. Like,
Yeah,
believe it or not,
yeah.
I worked
Yeah.
years ago, and I mean like almost
Mhm,
20 years ago, God. I
mhm.
worked for a organization here in New York
Yeah.
that actually for foster children who were wards of the state.
Yes.
And, unfortunately, the actual place I worked, there was a lot of Black and brown children there. And as you said, the either overdiagnosing, underdiagnosing
Mhm.
clearly brings in, over medicating kids. And
Yes.
so because of the
Yes.
behaviors of some of these kids, because of the environments they grew up in, and now they're in foster care, they're in a facility. Of course, there's going to be a lot of emotion, a lot of behaviors. And so that was
Absolutely.
the solution. The solution was to over medicate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it was, oh,
Absolutely.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah, it was just unreal to
Yeah.
me.
You're spot on, Alicia, and that's something that we've been marinating heavily on in classes. Like, you've got to look at the environment, and I think that's a huge piece of like decolonized care is knowing how much the environment plays on someone. Like you said, anybody would be shook up from the situation that those kids that you were working with. Anybody would
Yeah.
be shook up in those situations. So why not consider the environment, to know like it's not on them, it's the environment.
Mhm.
And then how can you advocate? There's so many different ways that we can advocate, which I think is another piece of decolonized work, is advocating on either the individual level or a systemic level or a community level, to see how can I support this person based up on all of these external factors.
Oh my gosh. And thank you
Mhm.
for that, because like, I
Absolutely.
think about it now, and it's just like I was so young then,
Yeah, yeah,
and like now just thinking about that, like I wish I could have had, more of a voice and a say in how we
yeah,
managed that, because
yeah,
it was just
yeah.
like a system, literally. Like we were
Mhm,
told
mhm,
when I got that job, I was
mhm,
told that basically this was, they're going from facility to facility to
mhm,
facility, and I realized, and this was
mhm.
the prison pipeline right before my eyes.
Exactly,
Like,
exactly, exactly, exactly. Those systems, I mean, that's huge. And then I can imagine in being a student at that time, it's like, well, you still have to get the grade, right? You still have to go based upon these things that they're telling you. This
right,
is right and this is wrong. And so, I find myself sometimes in lecturing, I'm like, this feels like BS. Like but I can't
right,
tell the students that because they're totally novice and they are learning this baseline, and so it's
right,
like you see all this happening before your eyes, yet there is some type of power differential that we have to submit to when learning and being in that student or younger professional position.
right. Yeah, yeah, it's so wild. It's just like,
Hmm.
the hope is that things are going to continue to like
Yeah,
improve in those
yeah,
worlds. But I mean, I'm so far removed that I have no idea. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, for sure.
but I wanted to bring up, I talked about in the
Yeah,
beginning, you were
yes,
like, oh, I don't know if we should talk about this, but I am really excited to
yeah.
talk about this whole um,
Mhm.
charge for nurse practitioners that are in the mental
Yes,
health world to continue their education by
yes,
way of providing services that they traditionally don't provide. So, like, share with us what you're
yes.
working on, because this is really exciting to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have a colleague that I've been working with now, oh gosh, maybe like 6 years or so.
Uh-huh.
We started off working together at a rehab, and then she's just always been my go-to, one of my go-tos for psychiatric nurse practitioners. So
Uh-huh.
I've got Candrace Smith out of Houston, which is like one of my favorite NPs, psychiatric nurse NPs. And then the one I'm referring to now, though, is Lauren Hughes.
Mhm.
And we were talking about just we both were kind of going on this similar business journey, and we're like, how can we collaborate together? And she's like, honestly, she's like, as I'm on these various pages with psychiatric nurse practitioners, I'm hearing from them, similar to herself, that a lot of them live in rural areas where they don't have access to therapists nearby, yet their clients need therapy and they need
Yeah.
some type of intervention beyond the medication management. And she's like, I think it would be great if we could collaborate and you could bring in that therapeutic intervention inside, and then I can bring in the medication management piece and how to bill for these types of services. And that way, the client gets more care, and care
Right.
is accessible for them when they come to their visit. But then also, the psychiatric nurse practitioner can make more money because then they can
Yeah.
add in additional codes to bill for more services. So it just kind of came out of us just like chatting it up one day and looking at what the pain points of psychiatric nurse practitioners are and their clients. And that's how we put this event together. So we have a workshop coming up. It's more of a training, but I like to do very interactive training. So we're going to do that from 10 to 1 p.m. on March 9th. And it's virtual, so anybody can come from, if they want to come from California or Texas, New York, where you're at, they're all welcome to come and learn these skills that are going to be specific towards cognitive behavioral therapy, which we know is helpful for a lot of NPs because of the evidence-based approach and insurance, a lot of the time wanting to see those evidence-based approaches when billing for insurance.
That is so cool to me
Thank
because
you.
I know because initially this is just the ignorance of me not knowing that much about the psych MP track and just like,
Yeah.
their actual uh their scope of practice. And
Mhm. Mhm.
so like I didn't realize that they didn't have and it's crazy because like I said, one of my best friends is a psych MP, but it just never dawned on me to even talk to her about like what she
Right.
actually does. But I
Right.
didn't realize they couldn't provide those types of services like the CBT, like, like I just figured that was just kind of like a part of, their
Yeah.
actual practice. So this is really cool that they could,
Thank you.
just have
Thank you.
additional skill to
Yeah.
offer their actual clients. That's amazing.
Absolutely. And what I've learned, because I think every school is different, is
Mhm.
that they do teach it, but I think there's such a heavy focus usually on the medication management piece, which
Yeah.
totally makes sense. That what I'm finding is a lot of the NPs don't feel as confident to offer the therapy services
Okay.
because of the limited training that some of them get. Not all of them, because some get really, really in-depth training, but they don't have to go and learn for 3,000 hours like myself about therapy when I was, before I was provisionally licensed, or when I was provisionally licensed. They don't have to go through that. And
Uh-huh.
so, or not to that extent. And so I find it's more of a confidence thing of like, okay, I learned maybe a couple chapters about this, but I haven't really learned more about it or gone to a fruitful training. And so this is really to kind of help boost that confidence in offering the service, so that they feel like they can do this really powerful work with their clients. And that's actually why I refer to those psychiatric nurse practitioners in particular,
Mhm.
because I know they're both strong in med management and therapy. And so I tend to work with clients sometimes that have sometimes more severe symptoms.
Okay.
And so I need sometimes backup that if I'm meeting with the client once a week, they're meeting with them. We kind of tag team the case, if you will, and then the client has that much more support. And so being that type of psych nurse practitioner that can do both and be strong in both is
Mhm.
like super duper cool.
That is cool to me. Like, and it was
Hmm.
so funny how you're like, "Oh, no, it's not." Because
Yeah.
y'all, just so you know, before Kimberly had no idea that I, am a nurse practitioner. So
Yeah.
when she said that, I was just like, "What? We're talking about
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
I love it." And I
Yeah.
just want to say something, like, actually have you talk about this before my brain, the
Yeah.
45-year-old brain, God bless it, sometimes it just goes zoom. So,
Same.
seriously. But I wanted to circle back as I'm, like,
Yeah,
hitting my
yeah,
elbow. Okay, whatever. But,
yeah,
like, I wanted to circle back and talk about the idea of mental health and mental health services in the Black community as
yeah,
it relates to religion.
yes.
And
Oh,
I'm
that's a
bringing that up because
good one.
growing up, Jesus, you just pray to him and he
Mhm,
solves your
mhm,
problem. So for those who are probably like wanting to know more about that,
mhm.
you know, seeking that liberation around trying to,
Yeah,
manage their mental health
yeah,
and to try to like navigate the religion piece.
yes.
How have you seen that in your actual client experience? And if so, like what does that look like for that person? Or it could be just various,
Mhm.
situations with people. But what does that look like? And like, yeah, just share. I'm like excited about this.
Absolutely, yeah. Alicia, you have the best questions, by the way. I just want to put that out there because I'm like, that is so essential, especially for the Black community, because
Yeah.
a lot of us do engage in some type of spiritual or religious practice. And I think
Right.
you bring up this whole piece about just pray it away. You know, you hear that oftentimes, just pray it away, God will take care of it, et cetera, et cetera. And
Right.
I'm from the school of thought that like you can have a therapist and God, like the two can exist. You know, both can help you out and both can be a way to get your healing. And the way that I look at it is, you know, God gifted the dentist to do what they do,
Yes.
you know, and he gifted the nurse and the doctor and the person who bags up your groceries and the person who sells you your clothes. Like he has gifted us with so many things, and so if he gave the knowledge to the therapist, like there's nothing wrong with seeing the therapist either. Like that's just another person with a different gift. And so I really like to normalize it. Like I am one of those weird people who I actually like going to the dentist. And so I always use the example of like, it's like going to the dentist. It's just something you do for maintenance. Go and get your teeth a little buffered out and it's all shiny and all good after that. And everybody, you know, it's really maintenance because similar to if we don't go to the dentist, what I notice is it usually hurts more and
Mm.
it usually costs you more money when you don't go and you don't get that maintenance. And
Yeah.
so with therapy, I'm like, just come and get the maintenance, you know. I can't say anything about the cost, but I think the emotional cost of not going to therapy can take a toll. And then of course things can get more severe
Yeah.
over time as well, the issue. And so I like to say, going back to that spirituality piece, is that you don't have to give up God. You don't have to give up your church. You don't have to, you know, give up your religious practices or anything of that nature. You can use it, use them together, and it can be so powerful. I know there's here in Dallas, there's a really huge church, TD Jakes and his daughter, Pastor Sarah Jakes. She talked about that, and it was a group of Black women just kind of sitting and dining together. And that was one of the things she mentioned is like, God wants you to merge those two together and knowing that there's no harm in that. It's actually very helpful and can be very helpful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Because I think about like when I
Mhm.
was growing up,
Yeah.
obviously this was like in the 80s. So, we've definitely progressed in
Yeah.
various ways. But I just remember that being like the driving force of
Hmm.
go to God for everything. And if you feel
Yes.
like you can't, or like or if you're going outside of his guidance or
Mhm.
whatever, then
Mhm.
that's like a sin. Like
Yeah.
and so I
Mhm.
think for the way I grew up, it
Yeah.
seemed like if people were doing this, like, oh my gosh, you're going against God. Like what are you doing? Like, how dare you? So it's refreshing to know that
Mhm.
at this point in
Yeah.
life in the evolution of humanity that we are in a space
Mhm.
to say yes, and yes, you still have your spirituality and your religion and your faith, and you can also
Mhm.
have psychiatric services or mental health services in a way of managing whatever's going on in your life.
Apps. I love what you said, Alicia. Yes, and
Mm.
I think that's the key of it all. And I think too, a lot of pastors have been charged with having licensed professional counselors or social workers, whichever the discipline might be,
Mhm.
on their premises and as a service that they offer. And so I think
Wow.
that's a huge piece. If you have the leader telling you, okay, this is okay, I think that also helps. So I've seen a lot of churches incorporate that as a service and they make it very affordable, sometimes even free for
Mm.
people to see a licensed professional because I do believe there is a difference between like Christian counseling and counseling. I might call it like secular counseling, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so and then there's like various different trainings that folks have to go through, and so I think they see the power in having a licensed professional. And I think while we're on this topic, Alicia, about religion, I also want to put out there that I work with a lot of folks who have religious trauma as
Yes.
well.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, a lot of religious trauma, and so I try to be very sensitive to that piece and help people walk that journey because that's a really hard and grieving like journey that they have to go on as well. And so it's almost like balancing the two, like how can you use it as a support? But then also, if this is something that you're grieving or you're tussling with, how can we work through that as well?
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for bringing that up because
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm a lesbian woman, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up in the Seventh Adventist church. And so
Yes. Mhm.
it
Mhm.
was just
Yeah.
nonstop, like constantly being told that, me, like me as a person, like I am going to
Exactly.
hell. This, that, and the other. And I was so
Yeah.
closely tied to the church because that was
Yes.
my life. We were at church all the
Yes.
time.
Yes. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
It's like, how is a place that I grew up, like, how am I like so different?
Absolutely. Exactly.
What is
Exactly.
wrong with me? Like, let's figure this out. So it took me a long time to realize that like
Yeah.
a lot of the
Mm.
teachings were traumatic.
Oh, absolutely. And I just so appreciate, Alicia, like your transparency and your vulnerability.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's like the almost when I think about my ideal client,
Mhm.
it is really a client who has been something through something similar to what you mentioned, because I like to show people a different way. Like the only thing my not the only thing, but my mom always taught me the main thing about God was love. And so
Yes.
I'm a firm believer that he loves all of his children, and not despite what
Mhm.
is different about them, but because what is different about them. And
Mm.
so I like to allow my clients to see that side of me because they've been shamed. I've even had clients come to me and say, "Oh, my counselor asked me, am I really gay?" Or, kind of question their sexuality, ask them if it's a phase that they're going through. And so there's also counselors out there who harm their client, and so we have to work through that trauma of like they're utilizing their religious implications or their teachings to place that up on their client. And so not only did they get hurt by the church and their family members and their friends, but they're now being hurt by a therapist that is not practicing cultural humility or
Mhm.
abiding by our ethical guidelines.
Wow. And
Mhm.
you would think and then I think that's another thing too. Oh my goodness. I'm like thinking of
Yeah.
all these things. My brain just is always going. But as I'm thinking about that, I'm like, that piece of like the therapist not
Mhm.
providing a therapeutic space is similar to what
Yes.
we see in healthcare with Black and
Yes.
brown people not
Yes.
being treated properly. And so I'm wondering,
Exactly.
clients that
Exactly.
come to you to get that repair because they were traumatized by
Yes.
a therapist, with
Yes.
their hesitancy in trying to like work with you because they're like, okay, I don't want to be treated like that. And do you see that trend in the
Absolutely.
Black community with therapy because they see
Absolutely.
what's happening on the medical side?
Oh, you're so spot on with that whole like medical model and how that
Mhm.
impacts us. What we call the wellness model through therapy. And it's interesting because I'll tell you, like, um, I can't say that none of my clients have been hesitant, because I know coming to therapy can be very anxiety provoking.
Mhm.
And something I really try to rely on is like, I'm a firm believer that if I have a good relationship with my client, we can do anything. And so I
Mhm.
really take a lot of time building rapport with them. And I always say, like, this culturally humility piece, this culturally humble care piece, it starts before I even meet with my clients. So in my intake paperwork, actually, one of the very last questions, and I was able to get this from a colleague that was willing to share, is asking the client, are there any things, I list all the various types of identities. Is there anything that you did not share in this paperwork yet that you want me to know about yourself and your identities? And for me, it like starts there by letting them know, like, I acknowledge this, I acknowledge the various aspects of you, and
Mhm.
I want to know about those various parts and aspects of you. So I'm kind of already letting them know from the gate. But then in addition to that, on my website, we have an inclusivity statement and things of that nature, and talk about like our work with the BIPOC community, because I want to make it very clear that like this is where I stand on these issues. You will meet some therapists that think that this work is not political, but it very much so is political. And so I need my client to know from the go that I am not someone who's going to bring harm to you. I am not here to judge you. I actually tell them, if you think I'm judging you at any point, fire me, because
Yeah.
that's what I'm supposed to do. And so I try to already set the atmosphere and the stage from the beginning, because unfortunately there's one too many clients who have been hurt by
Mm.
people who have my same credential and things of that nature. So and then once they get here, being able to be welcoming and opening, and I don't like my client to wonder where I stand. And for some people that's like, oh, you're telling them too much, but I'm like, no, like, I'm hearing this week, and this is not this week, but as an example with like my trans clients, like, when your rights are being taken away and I don't bring that up in a session to see how you're doing, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
That's a red flag. And so I like to get in front of these things and talk about these things from the go, so that my client does not have to wonder where I stand, because unfortunately they're already having to worry about that with a lot of friends, family members, colleagues, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh my, like, thank you. Like, I'm just like, this is so beautiful
Absolutely.
because it's like,
Absolutely.
it's one thing to have this skin color, right? But then to have the additional identities that create
Yeah.
marginalization, it's just like, okay,
Exactly.
like,
Exactly. Exactly.
where do I go?
Exactly. And that's I hear that a lot, Alicia, to be honest with you. That intersectionality piece
Mhm.
is a beast. It is such a beast. You're so right. When those identities start to compound upon each other, and then you're right. Like, we could be the same color, right? But then, do you still accept me? Do you still make room for me for all of my identities? And I've heard one too many client tell me, it took me forever to find you.
Oh.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's where that whole sense of like people really wanting to have like that idea of being liberated in so many ways
Exactly.
by way of
Exactly.
someone just holding space for them. Just like,
Absolutely.
this is for you.
Absolutely. Exactly. It's to me, I always feel so honored and blessed, because I literally get to be on someone's journey with them as they're dealing with some of the most difficult things. And my clients, they inspire me. Like, it kind of, I'm getting a little warm now, because they inspire me so much. One day I'll be able to fully just tell the whole story, but I always think, like, if they can do hard things, I can do hard things too, and
Yeah.
I want to practice what I teach. And so I've just been so incredibly blessed to see. They tell me, "Oh, Kim, I set this boundary with my mom, this weekend. Oh, Kim, I did this, and I felt so proud of myself." Or even holding that space for sadness of like, oh, that didn't go well, and I kind of lost my cool. Like, being there to hold it all is so special for me.
I can imagine that it's like beyond special. And at the same time, it's probably liberating for you as well because it's like you're probably seeing,
Mhm.
okay, oh my gosh, that's even though you're the professional in the space, but it's like on a personal level, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
okay, Kimberly, this is us taking us in too. Like,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, I go to therapy, like, I just got this really, really cool therapist. I've been working with somebody ongoing for like the past few years, but
uh,
I switched what I wanted to work on in therapy recently. And so I just got me a really awesome, cool Black female
oh,
therapist.
I love that.
And yes, and I was just like, oh man, I told my students on Monday, I was like, oh my gosh, my therapist almost snatched my wig this today, because she got me together. Like, she
Yes.
was not playing any games. And I was like, oh my gosh, maybe that's how my clients feel when I'm in session. But I'm a therapist who goes to therapists. I love it. It's self-care for me. And a lot of the time when I'm speaking to my client, to answer your question, I am speaking to myself in the same breath.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
that. I love that. Kimberly, I
Yeah.
could literally talk to you all day. Like this
I
was
know.
amazing. But before we go,
Yeah.
you have like you have a project that you're working on now, right?
Yes, 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 absolutely. We're gonna release it to the public next week, but I can share here for sure. I'm so excited. So, as a fellow Beyonce fan, Alicia, because that's something I got to learn about you off the podcast here, exactly. as we know, the queen, she came out with two songs this week, 16 Carriages and Texas Hold'em. And so,
Yes.
yes, one of my dear friends and colleagues in the field, Trinetta Powell, we are going to do a 4-hour retreat on March 30th from 10 to 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. It's going to be in person, and we are going to do a retreat that's going to, in a very creative way, process the themes of the song 16 Carriages. So we're going to get into the struggle and the resilience piece and family dynamics and self identity. We're going to get into some of those major themes that she mentioned in that song, and we'll laugh, we'll cry, we'll eat, and everything in between.
Oh my gosh, that sounds
Mhm.
unreal.
Yeah,
Like
thank
just,
you.
I'm excited for you. I gotta
Thank
get
you.
figure out like what happened. Seriously.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'll
Exactly.
share the information in the show notes for
Thank
sure.
you. Thank you so much. Yes, I'll make sure to send you the materials for sure. I'll get that to you.
Awesome. Oh my goodness, Kimberly. Before you go,
Yes.
as I say it again, if you could share with everyone where they can find you, any
Absolutely.
website, social media, yeah, take it away.
Absolutely, for sure. So on Instagram, I'm at Kimberly Parker underscore LPC.
Hmm.
My website's pretty easy to revive the number two thrive WC.com. That's where I'm mostly at. I'm also on TikTok as well, therapist underscore Miss Parker. But I'll make sure to get all those handles sent to you. And then
Oh
on
yay.
my website, my email address is actually at the very top. It's a hyperlink. Or I even have a contact page on my website as well. So people can reach me through any of those avenues. And I'm very responsive. So I'll make sure to get back to them for sure.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
Yes.
Kimberly, this conversation was so awesome. And
Thank you.
like I said at the beginning, we could go on and on
I know. I
as it
know.
relates to liberation in terms of
Yeah.
mental health for the Black and Brown person,
Yes.
because there's so much healing that needs to take place.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I would love to have you back on if that's possible. So,
Absolutely. I would love to be. I feel the exact same, Alicia. I could talk to you for so many more hours. And I just want to thank you for providing this platform. Like, I think this topic of liberation, all the various ways that it's being addressed by yourself and the other guest speakers, I think is tremendous and is necessary for our community. So I think also you're a part of this change that is needed and that is happening for our community.
oh, well, thank you so much. And
Absolutely,
that's my
absolutely.
hope is just to
Yeah,
continue to, help transform who we are as a people because we are amazing. Like we are
exactly,
amazing, seriously. So
exactly, exactly, exclamation point. So
yes, I love it. Oh my gosh, thank you so much again, Kimberly. And y'all, thank
absolutely.
you for listening to this week's episode of the Eating Podcast.
Um,
I'll see y'all next week. Thank you.